I just want to point out that in the back of the room, we have Michelle Plazzi-Collins. She's Assistant Director of Compliance. And we also have Heather Geary. She's one of the 2 Assistant Directors of the Region 1 schools. Region 1 schools are Charleston, East Boston area. And they are available in the back of the room if anyone wants to pull them aside and ask any questions. Just going to put a quick plug, because we had 3 speakers today, but one of them had to back out because she had the flu. We thank her for not coming. That was Gail DeGardo from the Mass Advocates Standing Strong. So I do have her handouts in the back. They look like this. Mass Advocates is a statewide self-advocacy organization. It's run for and primarily by people with disabilities, with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Their goal is to empower people with disabilities to speak up for themselves. And so there's a packet in the back with more information. You can go on the website if you want. So our first speaker for today is Jodie Elgee. She's from Succeed Boston. Take it away.
Hi everyone. Can everyone see that? I like to have it darker. Is it possible that we can shut off part of the lights? I don't know, or will they all go off? Do you know? So while we're doing that, I'm Jodie Elgee. I'm the Senior Director of the Counseling and Intervention Center. Anyone here ever heard of the Counseling and Intervention Center? Okay. Anyone here ever hear of Succeed Boston? Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Okay. And anyone here ever hear of the Barron Center? Okay. So we are all 3 of those things. But truthfully, we are a counseling and intervention center, and our name has evolved over the years to reflect the work that we do. So we do lots of things in, thanks, that's helpful. We do lots of things at Succeed Boston. We serve students who have violated the code of conduct. We have a short-term program, 3 to 5 days. We have a long-term middle school program, which is for students who are going to be out or have had cumulative suspensions greater than 10 days. And we also have voluntary workshops for students who have been involved in bullying and civil rights. That's 1 day a week. And the other, or bias-based speech and behavior. And the other is we have a voluntary substance abuse program, and that's more of an educational, a psycho-educational, psychosocial educational program that we offer for kids who need to learn particularly about vaping. Vaping has been a big problem, as we all know, and also about marijuana use. I'm here though tonight to talk to you about bullying prevention and intervention. We have been doing bullying prevention and intervention at the Counseling and Intervention for the last 10 years. And it's a big part of the district's commitment to...
Can I go to the next?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. That's okay. The district is very committed to creating safe and welcoming environments for all of our students. And as such, in 2010, shortly after the very sad, tragic death of Phoebe Prince, BPS created a safe space and bullying prevention hotline. Does anyone know about that? Okay. BPS people do. It's not good that you guys do not. So make sure you have my packet with the, and 2 things. Do you mind if I just hold this up for a second so I can see that you have this? Thank you. So this in here, make sure that you have this, and this gives you information as well as the PowerPoint presentation, and it talks very specifically about bullying prevention and intervention and how to report it. And we'll talk a little bit more about the hotline. But essentially, I'm going to talk about that at the end. I want to talk quickly with everyone tonight to provide opportunities for questions. I want to talk about what bullying is, what it is not, and how to best effectively deal with it, particularly deal with it around students who are receiving special education services. So if you could go back just for a second. So this training is important for a lot of reasons. One is 50% of students with disabilities are impacted daily by bullying behavior. Many of them are targets, and many of them are aggressors. We also know that students with disabilities are more worried about their safety at school. So we want to make sure that parents are aware of things that you can do to work with the school staff so that they understand the specific concerns of your child. We also know that school-based bullying prevention programs decrease bullying by up to 25%. So that's why BPS has a long and I would say a pretty intensive commitment to bullying prevention and intervention. Not only do we have a hotline, we have a 2-day intervention specialist training. Each school in the district has at least 2 people that are trained as intervention specialists. We have more than 1,000 people in the district right now who have been trained as intervention specialists. So they're the experts, the in-house experts in the buildings, and we know that the most effective interventions occur when the staff deal with those issues in classes. It's much better to have the students work with someone who knows them as opposed to having someone come out. So that is our model, and we've been building capacity for the last 10 years around bullying and interventions. And then, let's see, bullying is a learned behavior, and that's why we want to make sure that we're talking about it and dealing with it effectively. So bullying is deliberate, it's repeated, and it involves a power imbalance. So, when I say deliberate, I am not very good at telling jokes. And let's say that I tell a joke to you, and so I don't tell jokes because I'm not very good at it. But let's say I tell you a joke, and it's really innocent. I think it's innocent, but it offends you. I would say, as someone who is not intending to harm, I am so sorry. I mean, instantly, I would be really upset by that. I would say, that's not what I intended. I would try to make it right. So it would be an inadvertent harm that I have committed. If I was someone who was wanting to bully you, then the second I saw you squirm, I would say, gotcha. Not to you, but I would know in my head that, okay, that's your soft spot. And I would repeat that behavior. And that's the second part, is that it is repeated. So a one-off is not bullying. It has to be repeated. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And it doesn't have to be in the same way, but it does have to be repeated. There has to be a pattern. And also a power imbalance. So what are some ways that kids have power over other kids? Size, right, absolutely. Other ways? Think about ways that are not so obvious.
Speech delays.
Speech delays.
Physical features?
I was gonna say visual, because my son is legally blind and he was bullied, and so certain things he couldn't see, the other person could see and could do.
Absolutely. Social skills, right? Special education status. Perceived sexual orientation. Those are just some of the ways. Socioeconomics, who has what and who doesn't. Those are just some of the ways that we all have power over one another. Social skills is one of the greatest. And it is social exclusion that students describe as being the most hurtful. Why do you think that would be? Anyone? Why do you think it would be hard to be excluded?
Not being accepted.
Right. And
So desperate to be accepted.
Absolutely. And I don't know if anyone here has ever been excluded from something. Just raise your hand, I'm not gonna ask you, right? Right. I mean, even as an adult, it's painful, right?
Yep.
So the work of adolescents, I mean, and students, not just adolescents, but children, is to form relationships, right, with peers. And so if you're excluded from that peer group, the question is, what's really wrong with me, right? So the power imbalance is really important to know as well. So we're going to talk about what happens when two friends, and I think that's the next slide. Yes. So the power imbalance, we talked about some of the things: physical size, age, strength, popularity, members of a majority-minority group. One of the other things is that being outnumbered. So let's say that you and I are having a conflict and it's nasty, and we've been friends, and maybe the two of us push each other all the time, and we're doing, bothering, and then I start calling you names and you call me names. As nasty as that is, it's just involving the two of us, and we were friends. So that would be something that we're going to deal with, but it's not bullying. But the second I pull you in, when I say, about you, there's a power imbalance, right? So now it is us against you, and that totally changes the dynamic. All right, is that clear? Does anyone have a question about that? Because sometimes on the when we get calls on the hotline, people don't always understand that. That's hard to understand. As nasty as it is, it doesn't mean that we're not going to deal with it. It just means we're going to deal with it differently. Okay? And then, let's see. Go ahead and go to the next one. Bullying versus conflict. So that's what I was talking about. So bullying, the goal is to hurt, harm, or humiliate. The person bullying has more power, and there is a continuation of the behavior. The conflict is really a disagreement. Or even if, let's say, Grace and I get into a fist fight on the playground, and we both get hurt, that's not bullying. Well, except I'm bigger than Grace, but let's say, but you're gonna be tougher than me. Yeah, but right, so seriously, that is not bullying. That doesn't mean that the school doesn't have an obligation to do something about it. It's just not going to be considered bullying. And the reason it's important to differentiate between bullying and conflict is that in a conflict we can mediate. So we can sit down as together and talk about what happened. But in a bullying situation, we cannot mediate because people aren't on the same level. And so if you've ever called the hotline or you've reported bullying to the school, and the school does an investigation and says it's not bullying, I want to make sure that you all know that doesn't leave us off the hook. That just means that we have to deal with it in a different way. Grace, I'm wondering, let's see, you want to go to the next one? So, you're going to be up soon. Okay. So, unwanted behavior, that's what we talked about a little bit. So, we're pushing and pulling and doing bad things to each other. And then I start telling you to stop and stop and stop. And you don't stop. So once there's a change in the dynamic, if you and I are pushing back and forth and you say stop and I say stop and it's equal, that's not bullying. But let's say that I say stop and I stop bothering you and I say stop to you again and you continue to bother me, then that could be bullying. Okay, any questions about that? All right, let's see. Oh, I'm ready, I'm sorry.
Okay, you can just give me the eye.
I'll give you the eye.
Good, thank
Okay,
you.
so the 4 types of bullying: relational, physical, everyone knows physical. We see it, we hear it. cyber, and that's a really big issue, and we'll get back to that in a minute, and then verbal. So verbal, relational, as I said, that's usually involves, I'm gonna have to go back again, sorry. Relational usually involves social exclusion. And once again, as I said, that is very hurtful to kids, and it's hurtful to human beings to be excluded. The verbal, we hear it, and it's easier to intervene. And then the cyber, what are some of the, how many of your kids have phones? I'm just curious, will you raise your hand if your child has a phone? Okay. And have any of your children had experiences with any of the apps like WhatsApp and WhatsApp, right? And TikTok, and anyone know any of these other ones? TikTok. And so you know what I'm talking about, right? All of these different apps on phones. Snapchat. Do you know any others? I bet you do.
I mean, those are the big ones. The biggest thing we've seen is Instagram and Snapchat for older students, and TikTok for a lot of students, including younger students. That's what we've seen.
So if it happens, if it's cyberbullying, if there's any sort of social media issue, we still, as a district, have a responsibility to solve that. So it doesn't matter, we still have the responsibility to solve it. So it happened last weekend in New Hampshire. I sent a message to Pat, and Pat went to, and it was nasty, and Pat went to school on Tuesday and started talking about it. It's a problem for the school, so we have to deal with it. Okay, so I want to make sure that you guys understand that. I want to have Grace talk a little bit about verbal, because verbal can very often escalate to bias-based speech and bias-based behavior. And this is Grace from the Office of Equity, and you'll introduce
Yeah,
yourself.
it's okay. No. Hi, so my name is Grace Jung. I'm the Director of Training and Accommodations in the Office of Equity. And I work really closely with Jodie's team, because specifically we handle all allegations of bias-based conduct and sexual misconduct. So anytime a student is involved in a situation where a racial slur has been used, comments based on a student's disability, their race, sexual orientation, gender identity, all those things come to my office. And the sort of distinction between Jodie's team and my team is that we handle allegations that are considered to be incidents as well as bias-based bullying, right? So as Jodie's explaining with bullying, it's kind of deliberate, it's targeted, it's repeated behavior. Our office tends to respond to incidents that sort of just happen maybe like once and doesn't involve all the definitions of bullying. And so the things that we most commonly see for a verbal bullying and other sort of related incidents tend to be when there's bias-based speech involved. So the most common ones tend to be around a student's race and a student's, for this year, there has been unfortunately a big increase in students' sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation. Yeah, so unfortunately we've seen that rise this year. But typically race and national origin tend to be the biggest protected class implicated whenever there's an incident. So one of the things that we do with Jodie's team is it comes sort of at the end when we do our process. So all our school administrators and all employees in general are required to report to the Office of Equity an incident any time it involves a student. So and when the report comes to the Office of Equity, it triggers a series of steps that the school needs to follow in order to conduct an internal investigation. So similar to sort of Jodie's team about the protocols that need to be followed for bullying and the investigations that they need to do, we have a similar process as well. And at the end, when it comes to remedial measures, it depends, right? Sometimes it could include formal discipline. Sometimes it could include an educational and coaching opportunity. Sometimes it could be counseling. One of those options actually is referring students over to our Saturdays class that's conducted by two intervention specialists, is that their title? In Succeed Boston at the CIC, where they sort of have targeted program around the protected class that was violated. That was implicated during the incident. So if someone used a racial slur against another student and they, we find this to be an opportunity where, in addition to any other measures that may be taken at the school, an opportunity to educate the student about the painful history of the word and why it's not okay to use that word, so on and so forth. They may be referred to the Saturdays class where they will learn about all of that. So that's sort of primarily where my office gets involved in, is usually the verbal incidents, because it tends to involve a lot of biased speech.
Thanks, Grace. The other thing I want to say is that, we as a district have really deliberately made or taken steps where we are providing education before we are saying that there should be discipline. And that's what we have found in working very closely with the Office of Equity, is that sometimes kids don't understand what it really means. And so by providing this very targeted intervention that includes counseling, they get counseling in the Saturday program as well, and there's group and individual counseling, and then there's education around the type of bias-based behavior that the students have been involved in. What we have found is that students have much more empathy once they understand, and I think we all know that, right? You throw out a word and you may not understand how serious that is, or what the historical perspective is, and how hurtful that can be. And I think that our partnership has been great in that way. So, all right, thanks. And we'll get more.
Those only incidents that happen in school, if the kids are after school and just by themselves, is that?
Yep. So as Jodie said, the biggest misconception around what schools can investigate is that they can't investigate things that happen outside of school. I just want to make that very clear. It is completely wrong. And it does not matter if an incident happened, in another state, if it happened at 11, if the text message was sent at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night on your personal device, it does not matter. The minute it's been brought back into the school, the situation has essentially is now we have to treat it as if it happened at school, because now there's been an impact on a student's learning environment. And so we have to treat it as if it happened at school. So especially with social media these days, right, a lot of these sort of bias-based incidents and sexual misconduct incidents have kind of floated to the internet, right, and to social media apps. And so there's been a lot of confusion for parents, especially, and families who don't really know where to go. Like, do schools get to investigate? And this actually is something that schools we're continuing to provide training on, because again, it continues to be one of the biggest misunderstandings about what we can do. So if there's a screenshot of a text thread, if it's just even a report, like a written statement or a verbal statement saying, hey, this happened to me, we are obligated to investigate it.
And yes, after-school programs count.
Yes.
Absolutely. And if you get any pushback from your school leader, call the hotline, right? Call the Office of Equity. And the hotline, we always ask if you can to go first to the school leader, right? That's because it's much more immediate, right? So something happened this morning, I'm gonna talk about it when I pick my kids up at school, and hopefully there's going to be a quick resolution. That's the best scenario. However, if you go to the school and they don't do anything about it, you call us on the hotline, right? No big deal. And our expectation is that there are going to be things that parents need to talk through with someone who's not involved. And we will advise you too. So you don't have to, you don't have to commit if you call us to filing a report. But I want you to know, filing a report alleging bullying is not a poor reflection on the school. I want you to listen very carefully to that, because sometimes people are afraid to file a report because they're afraid that the school is going to get in trouble. The schools that get in trouble are the schools that don't do it, right? So when we're going through all the data, everything's electronic now, and we look through the data and we see a school with 0 reports, that's a little suspicious, right? Because we know it happens every single day. And in the current political climate as well, and I'm not talking about anyone in specifically, but the political climate has changed the way we treat one another. So we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of bullying reports, in the reports of sexual misconduct, in bias-based speech, right?
Yeah, our policies that look, the way that they look today have really been in effect for about 3 years. And since the policies have been put in place, including the one around bias-based conduct towards students and sexual misconduct towards students, we've seen a dramatic amount, an increase in reports each year. We think that it's good to see those numbers. It means schools are actually taking action and reporting it, so we can guide them through steps to address the incidents as they come. But we have seen a dramatic increase in certain types of incidents, definitely with bullying, but also again, specifically around national origin, there was a big increase in 2017. And so it's just really important that schools, that we know about these incidents. And again, very clear, as Jodie said, that if you feel like something's not happening at the school level, to always feel free to kind of bring that to the Office of Equity for bias-based incidents or sexual misconduct incidents, or to Jodie's team for bullying incidents, because we work with the schools directly to be like, hey, so what's going on here? You know, what's being done? And if there's anything that we can do to assist in making sure the investigation is completed, we will work with the school. So, yeah.
Right. We've debated this many times, the Office of Equity and my department, to talk about whether or not reporting is up for a positive reason. And that, so if you think about it, the fact that people are reporting is a good thing, right? Because not only does it's a reflection of what's going on, but also I think that we are giving people the tools necessary to report, and we're also saying that this is unacceptable, right? As a district, we're saying, we're not gonna do this.
Right. The increased reportings and also just the things that we put in place to encourage reporting is not about getting students in trouble.
Right.
It's not about getting schools in trouble.
Right.
The biggest thing is that what we found is that in general, we want to reset the expectation about what's okay in school, right? We want to make sure students feel welcome. We want to make students feel like they can come to a trusted adult and share anything that's happened if they're being affected by something. And so really the key thing here is actually about the students, all of them, that have, so just kind of creating a space where they feel comfortable sharing things that are not okay. It's not something that we would tolerate. And also, in addition to that, it's not, again, about formal discipline all the time. It's actually working with the schools to communicate any potential resources that can assist students on an individual level, but the classroom level and even on a school level. So one of the things that we're doing right now in the Office of Equity is sort of, we already have some resources, but we are doing a total revamp and assessment of resources that can include individual, classroom, and school-wide supports, so like lesson plans, curriculum, so on and so forth, so that schools can get that support. But in order for us to be informed about what's actually needed, we need to know what's going on in schools.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead. We talked
Keep
about
going.
unwanted modes. So this is pretty simple, direct and indirect. I used to be a teacher, an intervention specialist at the counseling center, and the one that always used to get me was, no one said a word, but Grace walks by me and I look across the room and just make eye contact with one of my friends. Indirect, right? Everyone knows what's going on, everyone knows what that means. And so as classroom, as the adult in the classroom, our expectation, and I'm telling you this because not, obviously you're not in the classroom, but our expectation is that the adult in the classroom is gonna address that behavior. You're not gonna go like, I saw what you just did, but they're going to set the tone. So I'm gonna say to Grace, I saw what just happened. I'm gonna be discreet, I'm gonna be respectful. I'm going to try to model the behavior that I would ask her to use in the classroom, with the idea being that even if it's not a big deal, everyone in this classroom knows what's going on. Every single person, all of the students saw what just happened. And I, as the adult in the room, need to make sure that every student in that room knows, I know what's going on, and this is unacceptable. And that's what we're really working with our staff around that, is we are the adult in charge. And so even if the student says, not a big deal, that was, no big deal, or that's a force miss, which is sometimes what I hear, doesn't matter. It's a problem for me, right? And that's, once again, as Grace was saying, we're setting the tone for what is acceptable behavior in our schools and how we want students to behave and treat one another. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm not looking at you. This is just some information for you generally, that this is how the range of students with special education, how it falls out across the country. Not the country, the state. And that in BPS, about 20% of students, so 1 out of 5 students, is receiving special education services. So the interventions in dealing with students, with all students in gen ed and with students in special education or receiving special education services, is to try to normalize as much as we can. So we want to model behavior, because what we know is sometimes kids just don't know, right? I can't say that enough, that sometimes kids just don't know. So we want to develop social skills groups, so small groups of students with similar needs working on skills together. Not a pullout, but that, you guys are gonna work on a writing project. You're gonna do an art poster. That with all the same themes around, an art poster, all the same themes, maybe it's gonna be about empathy. Maybe you're gonna learn specifically about history of slavery. Whatever it might be, that we have identified as something that needs to be talked about as a group. So perhaps kids are having a hard time treating each other kindly. Simple as that. That we want to use books as an example to be able to talk about the way that we treat each other. We want to encourage classroom discussions. We want to be able to have people talk about how it feels without it being, let's say that I'm really being unkind to you. We don't want to focus specifically on you. We want to talk about, open it up to the class as a whole about has anyone ever felt like they were excluded, right? We want to try to normalize feelings that people have when they're being targeted. So social lunch groups. Okay.
This?
Social lunch groups, this is great. Do any of your schools use social lunch groups? Yeah, so lunch is always, well, not always, but often a nightmare for kids, particularly kids with special education needs. A lot of noise going on, lots of people, disorganization. And so to have a lunch group and to have that be a rotating lunch group, members rotate through, once again, we are normalizing participation in those lunch groups and those social skill groups. Social recreation groups, once again, home base. So we want to provide kids with a way to report safe person, home base. So if, what's your name, because I've called on you so many times.
Nolita.
Nolita? Beautiful. So, Nolita, let's say that we know that you've been having a hard time, kids have been targeting you at school. What we want to do is we want to give you some opportunities to say, I need some help, without saying, he's bullying me, she's bothering me, but to discreetly provide you with a safe space and to ask for help when you need it. So some of the easy ways to do that, 5 minutes, okay, with color-coded cards, for instance, you know, that stickies, you could use a sticky, that there would be an arrangement in the school where if you show that color discreetly, you put it down on your table, that the classroom teacher would know that you could go to the nurse, you could go to the school adjustment counselor, whatever that might be. So those are some easy ways to identify safe places for kids. All right, bias-based speech, we already did that, so that's good.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So what if in the social skills group, the bully is present, like the one who kinda is the leader of the bullying and kinda the other kids are afraid of, and they're in the social skills group as well, and what do you do then?
So, the person who, so the target should never be with the bully in a situation like that, if it's ongoing bullying issues. So I should say the student who's bullying, not the bully. But,
And sometimes when there's a bully, it's like, you know, they bully the other kids, and the other kids are afraid, and then no one wants to join the group because, you know, the bullies aren't allowed there, they're the leader, they're the alpha, or whatever,
right.
you know what I mean?
Right.
So-
Well, one of the things that is very effective is to ask for commitments from everyone at the table. So what are you willing to do? And sometimes what we ask the student who's involved in bullying to commit to is to do nothing, right? I need a commitment from you to just sit there and say nothing. So all of that stuff has to be arranged prior to. Once again, if it's an ongoing issue, it needs to be reported. Okay, go ahead. I just got the 5 minutes, so I'm moving. LGBTQ students are frequently targeted. You can read about that. And I'm not minimizing this is a huge issue. I just want to get to reporting. But what's really important is adult bias impacts our ability to do thoughtful bullying investigations. And I don't want to skim over that, but I know that I'm all right to say. Okay, so boys, real boys don't cry. He needs to toughen up. She shouldn't be dressing like that. What do you expect when you act like that? All of those things reflect bias from the adults. If you hear that, you should be calling the hotline, and you should also be calling the Office of Equity. I want you to know that if you call the hotline and there is an issue around bias, we automatically refer it to the Office of Equity. And we will tell you that, and we do a dual investigation. But these are the things that are so hurtful because it tells kids to shut up, right? Bullying is a rite of passage. No, it is not a rite of passage. It made me who I am today. Oh, well, you know, I've got quite a few Band-Aids around, you know? No. And it's not the way it used to be. It's not the way it used to be. When I was in 3rd grade, I used to get punched in the stomach every day by a girl named Jane D. I won't tell you anything more than that. But punched in the stomach every single day. It was terrible. However, I went home at the end of the day. We didn't even have a phone in our house. And so I would go home, it was over, right? It was over. Go to school the next day, it happened again. But for our kids, with social media, it just continues. It continues. And so kids are just being hit with this stuff all the time. And I don't mean that physically hit, but it's just constant. And once again, because we want to belong, kids are saying, you know, oh, I want to see that, you know? Facebook, we often say when it's a bad situation with Facebook, don't just get off it. I can't because I want to know what's going on, right? So it has gotten worse over time. And one of the things that we work with staff on, we do a lot more about this, because if bias is impacting your ability as an adult to do an investigation, then you need to back out, right? You need to back out of that, and that's okay.
Can I ask a dumb question? Can you like define bias, just the most simple term? What do you mean when you say bias?
Okay, so I'm going to use the example about boys not crying. So if I believe that a boy that cries is a sissy, that's a bias, okay? If I believe that people that are poor are more likely to break the law, that's a bias. So it is, or if my religion impacts the way that I view the world, then that's a bias, right? So we just all have to know what our biases are and to be able to step back if you can't do it. Did you have a
I was
question?
just gonna say, we all have biases.
We do.
Every one of us has
That's
biases.
right.
You can't say that. You just have to be aware of them.
That's right. That's right.
We do have them.
That's right. And the thing is, we don't ask, when we do the training much more in depth, we just say, you don't have to identify what it is if you don't want to, but you can just say, you know, can you, like tap in, tap out, can you help me with this? This is just, I can't deal with it right now, right?
So it sounds like the concern is a bias that is inflicting harm, right? Because if we all have biases,
So, yeah, this is part of the, I actually train staff as well around bias-based conduct, what that means. And just to kind of mention, bias as a whole can be good, bad, or neutral, right? So, for example, raise your hands if you like pineapple on your pizza. Okay, so for those who raise your hands, you are all wrong. No kidding. But that's right? So bias is anything that we have a certain sort of like slant to, right? And it can be good or neutral, right? I can have a bias for pineapple, on pizza, and I can have a bias against people who like pineapple on pizza, right? So bias itself is not, it can be good, bad, or neutral. The type of bias I think that can affect sort of the work that we do is, again, number one, bias in general, where something that you are thinking of, or something that has been ingrained and socialized from the minute that you were born, really, is affecting sort of the perception of how you do work. And then specifically, just to make it even one more up, the type of bias that our office investigates, my office, the equity office, is what is known, I think, more colloquially as a legal definition, discrimination. So bias-based conduct in our office is basically two parts. One, it has to involve some kind of unfair treatment, right? Some kind of adverse action. But then two, it's based on your membership in a protected class. So there's 16 of them in the state of Massachusetts, and most of which apply to students as well. And so basically some kind of action based on that. And if adults in particular, for example, are engaging in bias-based conduct towards students, or even student on student, any kind of thing that's involved, our office actually has the ability to hold adults accountable. So for example, if the adults are the ones, because we hold them to high standard, right? And their policies affects them as well. So if adults are the one participating or doing something or saying comments in a way to students that is bias-based, we actually have a lead investigator, director of compliance and Title IX coordinator, Quinnell Gomez, who investigates employees who may have engaged in bias-based conduct towards students. So that's just another kind of layer of compliance that our office has as well.
Okay, and then finally, we're just going to go very quickly. Thank you. The bullying prevention and intervention reporting system. We're going to go quick. Really, this is going to be quick. This is what happens I'm not gonna go over it with you, I'm gonna give you this short and, well, I'll tell you quickly. So, if you call the hotline, everything is electronic, we file the electronic report, and it's answered by counselors from the Counseling and Intervention Center. So you call the hotline, you file the report, we file the report, the school usually gets it the following day, there's a little bit of a delay. So today is Monday, let's say, you call on Monday, the school gets it on Tuesday, they need to notify you by Thursday, 2 days, that they are in receipt of the complaint. In addition to, and that's all on the next few slides, in addition to that, they have beginning Tuesday when they receive it, that's day 1, Wednesday, day 2, day 3 would be Thursday, day 4, Friday, Monday. They need to complete an investigation and they need to get back to you with the results of that investigation. So if it may be bullying, it may not be bullying. Even if it's not bullying, they have an obligation to get back to you and let you know. If you call the hotline, we ask you to call us back if you don't hear from the school within 48 hours. And if the investigation is not complete and you don't hear back from them again, we ask you to call us back again. We bump these things up higher. So very quickly, we move these up through into the superintendent level. So we take it seriously, schools are accountable, and we follow the protocols.
I think the parents are confused though when they call the bullying hotline gets in touch with the school gets in touch with the parent, and then the parents think they can't call back to the bullying hotline once the school says they've done something, but it's not adequate enough.
Okay, so if you do call the hotline, we say that. We say, call us back. If you don't get what you need, you call us back. And if you could spread that word too. And the reason that we're doing it, we do it electronically, is there's a paper trail, right? So there's a really nice, and then it's not closed until we get the report back from the school saying what they've done. So they've developed an action plan, they've developed a safety plan for the target. Okay, I think that's it. I think I've done way too much. So that just tells you there are links on there, but basically you can go on the bullying prevention and intervention page on the Boston Public Schools. I think that could be it. Yeah, those just, if you can click through fast, I think that is it. Call us anytime. Even if you're not sure if it's bullying, we're happy to talk it through with you. And is that it? I think so.
I was just also going to add, I was on the website today, so if for some reason, there isn't information available for anyone who's obviously not here tonight, you can just tell people to go on Boston Public School website, type in the search engine, just type in bullying policy, and it will bring you right up.
I think that's it, right? You can text the hotline, that just is, yep, that's it. Sorry to take so much time.
No problem,
but,
thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Judy.
you.
Will you guys stick around, or you guys?
Yeah, we can stick around.
So I'll stick around in case people have more questions. Pizza came in while they were talking, so please grab it, there's 6 boxes. Next up is Ellie Castine, she's from Boston Bullies. They have a ton of handouts out there and some bracelets, and there's 2 posters that are next to the pizza. Feel free to take one home. And welcome, Ellie.
Thank you. Yeah, please get food. It smells really good. So I'll just get started and start talking while you're all doing that. But my name is Ellie Castine, and I've been working for Boston Bullies. I started this while I was in grad school getting my doctorate in counseling psychology. I kind of thought it would just be something fun while I was in grad school, and here I am still doing this because I think it's a really nice complement to what I do during the day, which is my track in particular is violence prevention and adolescent risk assessment. So as you can imagine, I'm usually working with kids who have been victims of bullying or on the extreme end have also been doing a lot of the bullying, and they tend to go very much hand in hand. So this is a nice way to get out there and get in front of it. And talking about more of the prevention and intervention. The blessing and the curse of when you have multiple presentations is that much of what I was going to talk about was addressed, but the good news is that our information is totally consistent, and so that's great. Yeah, we love that. So I'm going to try to, you have the slides, you can certainly look through them, but I'm going to try to just focus in on things that weren't touched upon to kind of add to the previous presentation. So if I just skip through something, I feel confident that we covered it. So just to also tell you a little bit about Boston vs. Bullies. So it's an initiative out of the Sports Museum, which is at TD Garden. It's a fun way that the organization has engaged Boston athletes that range from the Patriots players to the Bruins to Olympians. So yeah, and all of our, you can go to the next slide. All of our materials are free and available to schools in the community. So at any point you can go to the website, and there are all kinds of, as was mentioned by Sandy, there's lots of materials here in the back, but at any point you can download things. There are worksheets, there are like one-on-one parent-child plans, there's kind of a little bit of everything. This just gives you a sense of the athletes that are in this current version of Boston vs. Bullies. You can read about them more, or you may know them. As I was mentioning, there are educational videos. I think the video in total is about 33 minutes, but it's broken down by segment in terms of what it's addressing by bullying, and this is where you're hearing from the athletes. So as much as kids might enjoy hearing from us and their parents, it's kind of cooler to see like a favorite Patriots player saying why bullying isn't cool. Broadly, we use a sports connection. It has kind of a really nice parallel to targeting bullying, just this idea of a game plan, that it's really important to think in advance, come up with a plan before you're in this stressful situation. This idea of practicing, you don't go to the championship game without spending a lot of time rehearsing and going over what you need to do, and just that you're on a team together. We know that also all kids aren't into sports, but I think you can still, if they're into the arts, you still practice before the final performance. There's some level of teamwork and whatnot. So, yeah. So, modified objectives. I feel confident that we have a good sense of what bullying is, and I really appreciated that highlighting of what bullying is and what it isn't. What I will do is, I think really spending some time on thinking about what I'm talking about is really individual intervention. So we heard about some wonderful things going on, like more broadly, such as groups and things like that, but these are things that you can be talking with your kids about individually. And then I'll spend also a little bit of time on cyberbullying in more detail, because I think we're just seeing more and more that this is happening at younger and younger ages and is just becoming even more pervasive. Bullying's against the law, just wanted to name that, so that you can leverage that at any point, assuming that it meets the criteria for bullying. We can kind of pass through this. I think we can all agree bullying is unfortunately a problem. And youth with disabilities tend to be more likely to be targets or just involved in bullying in general. Keep going.
Go back, keep going.
The one thing I do want to say here is that only less than a third of students notify, the studies have shown that less than a third of students notify adults when they've been bullied, and many believe that if they do tell an adult that they won't help or it'll make things worse, and yet studies show that when bystanders, and this would be like the language I saw that BPS is using is upstander, so a good bystander, when they do intervene, that bullying stops really quickly more than half the time. So I think that's really important to hold on to, that with the appropriate skills, this doesn't need to be as big of a problem as it is. Alright, so we're gonna cruise on through. So just this idea that it's on purpose, it happens over and over, and there's a power dynamic involved. We talked about there are the 4 different kinds. I think one thing just to note here is you tend to see that at different ages, these are more salient. So when you ask younger kids about bullying, they're like kicking, punching, hitting, and then obviously, as you can imagine, like the relational stuff comes up a lot more entering middle school, kind of a deadly time with relational and exclusion and all of that going on. And similarly, cyberbullying is now, unfortunately, you're seeing it as young as elementary school. Some things to just think about that, like, particularly vulnerable types of bullying that we've seen with youth with disabilities is manipulative, so kind of just being taken advantage of in some way. Conditional friendship, confusion around like what a friendship is, and trying to really emphasize like a healthy relationship that's mutual, and exploitive bullying. So just in some way the features of a disability are used to then bully that child. I think, and a little bit of this was touched on before, this like fine line between teasing and taunting, and this idea that teasing is really playful, it's not meant to be hurtful. At any point, the two people can switch spots, so at one minute I'm getting teased and the next I'm teasing. You can also, the person can say stop and it stops, versus taunting, which is the more pervasive, it's hurtful, it's laughing at, it's one-sided, it's intended to shame or embarrass in an ugly kind of way. This is just to give you a sense of like an example of an activity that's on the website. There is a worksheet, for instance, where you could talk with kids about the different types and kind of go through that, and just to show you what we have available. So kids who do the bullying, I won't spend too much time here tonight, and I know it might seem like a funny place to start, and yet I think it's an important place because whether we like it or not, we've usually, I think most people, it's hard to admit, we've all gotten wrapped up in things and participated in bullying behaviors at some point in our lives. I think it can be a lot harder to talk about in a lot of ways. And so, you can go to the next one. I mean, I think one thing to really think about is why kids bully, and I'm sure you all, does anyone have thoughts?
For attention.
For attention, yep. Boredom, yep. Yep, yeah.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, for sure. All definitely good reasons. I think it'd be click. Yeah, so it can be a control thing. They may not feel like they have control in other aspects of their lives, and so this can be a way that they feel powerful. Attention, as it was named. They lack self-confidence. It may be a reflection that they're having trouble in other areas of their life, or they're having trouble at school, and this is just their way of taking it out. And similarly, they may have actually been a victim first of bullying. One of the things I continuously emphasize with kids when talking about bullying is that they're not a bad kid. They're making really bad choices, and it needs to be addressed, and it's not okay, but trying to make sure that like there's still some level of empathy, especially when you don't know why the kid's bullying. And so kind of always asking like, what function is that behavior serving? What is it that they are trying to achieve? What are they achieving by bullying? And one of my most favorite examples of that was there was a kid that every day on the school bus on the way to school, it was just like targeted, like just rotated through every kid on the bus. As you can imagine, parents had had enough. It was no one was enjoying this. And so what they figured out though was that he just wanted some, some level of control. And so what they ended up doing was they gave him a clipboard where he took attendance on the bus. The attendance didn't serve any actual purpose, unbeknownst to the kid, but it was a way that he just needed that sense of like, it gave him a role and a purpose, and that was certainly lacking in other areas of his life, and there wasn't an issue after that, and so just getting creative in the ways that you think about it. Obviously, if your child is bullying, the same way you would address any behavior, setting firm and consistent limits, being a positive role model, just thinking about, kids are very perceptive. They watch everything you do, the way you interact with other people. So using non-physical discipline, again, thinking about empathy, and I think this is something that I can't emphasize enough that I'm constantly talking about, but like, just apologize. That can go such a long way and make a really big difference. And yeah, having positive communications with the school, recognizing it's not your fault as a parent either. I think that can be quick to feel like you failed in some way or you've done something wrong, and that's not the case, and it really should be collaborative. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, thank you. You can skip this. So then, one more thing about kids who are bullying. The other thing is that, like, emphasizing it's really not about revenge, and it's not even necessarily about punishment. Like, they need to be held accountable, but it's about making it right and trying to shift how they're using their power in that way to hurt. They can use that same power to do good and to help. And so, like I was talking about, thinking about the function of that behavior, like how can you kind of create that shift? But you hear a lot of kids like, what about if someone's getting bullied, and then it's the quick like revenge cycle where you're just like, well, then it would never end and we'd still be here. Obviously, I think that we know kids can get bullied for any reason, so you can kind of skip through this. We've talked about a lot of these different things. I think one thing, there are obviously very clear signs that a kid is being bullied that are the obvious. I think the more subtle ones to think about is any changes. Changes if all of a sudden your kid was happily going to school and all of a sudden they're like, not so much. It's becoming harder and harder. Seem just a little more fearful, a little more anxious. Any sleep changes, physical complaints that are vague, especially related to school days. Any changes or loss of friends. I think with any of these, this could be, a headache. Your kid could not be drinking enough water, right? Like there's many explanations for this, but I think the key thing is just to be curious and keep a pulse on that of what's going on, and recognizing that they may not be sharing something and there could be something happening at school. That's a more obvious one, that if their belongings are lost or damaged, that there's probably something happening. If you suspect your child is a target, you all know your children best. Some may be very forthcoming about it. Some may easily answer you if you ask directly. Others may not. And you may need to ask broader questions and kind of about the school culture, about the climate, what their experiences are like, maybe asking about friends' experiences. Being a really good listener, I could imagine, in any circumstance where you hear about someone that you care about that's in a situation that's harmful or hurtful to them, feeling really angry, feeling really upset, but trying to just be a really good listener and hear them out and hear what they have to say. And then truly practicing the different ways to stand up to bullying. And it can feel really cheesy, it can feel, kind of weird, but it's important so that when they're in a situation, they're able to, it's hard when you're feeling anxious in those situations to think about the right thing to do, but if you've practiced, it obviously can be a little more second nature and more accessible. Just making sure that you emphasize to your children that you're pleased that they told you, that it's not their fault. You believe them, you're sorry that it's happened to them, they don't deserve this, nobody does. And emphasizing those, so as much as you're naming all of that, also creating some of that hope, like there's something we're going to do here. We are going to work together as a family, we're going to work together with the school and figure this out. So some key things that kids can do is, the most disarming thing for bullies is truly standing up to them, which is obviously easier said than done. And that can be as simple as like looking a kid in the eye, it can be responding just calmly, it can be talking to, emphasizing that bullying, I think sometimes can come up like this idea of like, oh, it's snitching or you're tattletale or whatever, but just emphasizing that bullying's serious, it leads to really serious consequences and it's not okay under any circumstance. And so when you're snitching, it's on things that aren't necessarily big deals, but this is a big deal. And obviously just emphasizing safety throughout. Another example of something is we have a friend detective worksheet, which can be helpful to just work through like healthy kind of friendships versus unhealthy friendships. So the bystander, why bystanders stay silent, and again, yeah, so I think unfortunately we've all bared witness to things that we might have wished we spoke up. It's hard to do, and I think emphasizing that, it takes a lot of courage, and yet it's really, really important. All of these different reasons. A kid may be afraid that it's good that they're going to become the target. They may be afraid that they're going to be called a snitch or some sort of name. That they'll be drawn into the bullying and end up in a situation where they're participating in a way they don't want to. They may feel unsafe, fear revenge or retaliation, or just feel powerless, that there's nothing that can be done. And I think that really, for me, this is the part of the work that I think I appreciate the most, because there is so much that can be done, and so really arming kids with the tools and the belief that they, empowering them, that they can help, whether it's a friend, whether it's just someone else, that they all play a role in their communities around whether it's tolerated or not. What's nice about, so we have a kind of a range of different types of interventions that we talk about, and I think this is helpful too, that we all have different personalities, right? Some of us are really outgoing and bold and not easily embarrassed, can put themselves in situations. Others might have to take more indirect approaches, maybe quieter, more soft-spoken. That's totally fine, and I think that the key within all this too is that there are options. And so, direct interventions could be anything from getting, if you're better friends and know the bully better, getting them out of the situation. And that could be as simple as like, if you get in trouble again, I'm not going to be allowed to go to your house, because if my mom hears about that, like, that won't work. Or if it's, the kid being bullied, just get them out of the situation while you can get help. You can directly tell the bully to stop. If it's just some sort of verbal situation, trying to play peacemaker in a way, or kind of join in and be an ally to the kid that is being bullied and stand up for them. More indirect is that what you realize is usually there's people witnessing this, and so rallying those people together, like you can then be a team to stand up to bullying. Another thing that is a lot more subtle, but again I think can go such a long way, is this idea of, even if it had nothing to do with you, but later on you say to that kid that got bullied, I'm so sorry that happened to you this morning. I even tell kids, I'm like, you could leave like an anonymous Post-it note, like just, stick it in their desk or whatever, but just something that could literally be the game changer. Mm-hmm. Truly, even if they don't know who it's from, if they're thinking about like, oh, is anyone noticing me? Is anyone, just helping to feel seen, some sense of belonging. And that's such a small, talk about using your power for good. It's such an easy lift for someone who's in a good spot to do something as simple as that, and also can keep them out of it in that way, but could make a huge difference. So again, there's a document that can be really helpful to really think about the game plan in advance. Like, who would you call? Who would you go to? Okay, the bullying happens in your after-school program. Who's your contact there? Is that getting in touch with a parent? Is that talking to the person that leads that? Is it at a sports program? Okay, which coach would you go to? And just really thinking through those steps, because again, as we all know, when things happen that are intense or make you feel anxious, it's way harder to access all of that stuff. So if you've thought about it in advance, it can be really helpful. All right, cyberbullying. So obviously, cyberbullying is anything happening behind a screen. These days, it's like there's too much to count. Video games that I didn't even know you could communicate on. It's everything. So some key takeaways. Kids will fight you on this, but if you put something online, you can't take it back. And all the time, kids are like, no, I deleted it, and I'm like, look, I'm on the other end of this, watching people years later, something they deleted that is still circulating and preventing them from getting a job, or whatever it may be. So, trying to nail that down as much as you can. The other one is you can't control who will see what you put online. I also get, like, my profile's private, I only accept people I know. And trying to also just help them understand that, like, each person that you connect with has all the people they connect with. And at any point, things can be screenshot, they can be shared, and things can spread so quickly. And I think that's the really terrifying part about cyberbullying. And because that idea of like bullying, it has to happen more than once. Like it inherently does with anything posted online because the risk of it multiplying is huge. Obviously, don't share personal information online. Well, I say obviously, and yet same thing with don't share your passwords. And when I was at a high school in Boston a few years ago, we had a huge incident with a kid that someone else knew his password, and it was really difficult to try to then backtrack to prove that it wasn't him. And so as you can imagine, that gets messy too. And yeah, that the information has a real impact. What to do if cyberbullying is, if you see it, obviously don't join in. I think don't encourage it by forwarding or reposting it. And I think this one is huge because you do see kids that, for instance, will post it saying, or share it with their friends, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening to this person. Okay, well, you're still spreading it and perpetuating it. And so, and I know I've been guilty of that too in the past and sharing certain things. And so making sure that, like, if you've shared the message at all, it should be like to a school administrator, to a parent, to an adult, or don't share it. Again, you can show support to the victim, so that could be a private message just saying, you know, I'm so sorry, this is totally unfair, you don't deserve this. Or, you know, it could be something more direct to the bully, telling them to stop. Obviously getting help from an adult. If your child's getting cyberbullied, I think you probably need to rethink, like, your level of involvement. That could be a whole talk in and of itself around what that's like. Sometimes it's best not to respond. And obviously at any point you can report the material to the school, police, and or the website. The biggest issue with this is Snapchat, obviously. That is the one to emphasize. It disappears and has, I mean, I see issues with this all the time. So trying to encourage kids to just, you know, their verbal report of what was said on Snapchat, at times it ends up being like a she said, or whatever. So, and then obviously you can always block people, delete them, and so on. Obviously the other thing with cyberbullying though is just that, like, traditionally bullying, if it took place at school, I mean, never okay, but kids got a reprieve. Kids are now reachable at all hours of the day, and so that is like a whole other dimension of what they need to cope with, and yeah, so figuring out kind of healthy boundaries more broadly around technology just because of the risk of this. What I can't stress enough is talking about bullying before it's ever an issue in your family, right? Because then it shows where you stand on it. Hopefully it's never an issue in your family, but that way, you know, it can empower the kids to be helpful. And it, like I said, it sets a really important foundation and tone. Pay careful attention. And again, emphasizing that we're all in this together and we can all do something to help. Thinking about schools, you know, and thinking about the schools that you're at, like making sure that there are posters and visualizations that emphasize this. There are clear policies that everyone's aware of. And yeah, that schools need to think about communicating regularly, and you as families can do that too. Obviously, kind of just reviewing what I talked about, talking with your kid if you suspect something's going on, asking for details, listening carefully, watching your kid's reactions, monitoring that, and always talking to the school as needed. And kind of lastly, and this is the psychologist in me, this is heavy. It can be really intense. It can be really dark. We all come in with our own histories, with our own experiences, and whether that's something related to bullying or whether it's not at all, it's a lot to handle. And so I think also recognizing that, I mean, being a parent is hard in general, but really thinking about taking care of yourself, just because if for no other reason, you're modeling that for your child. That was a complete, like, whirlwind. I just fired a lot of information at you. I am happy to answer any questions. I'm sure the first presenters are as well. And like I said, all of our materials are accessible on the website, and I'm happy to share my email if you have follow-up. Yeah.
On the website or indirectly related are there younger skewed resources? My kiddos are 5, so I'm already thinking of how do I wrap this into a 5-year-old friendly
Yeah.
format.
So this is certainly like the target age of this was like 4th and 5th grade, but it can all be modified. I've done it with, I think, like 36-year-olds at once. So there is definitely just ways to bring it down. I think that the toughest piece of it is kind of that abuse of power and trying to explain that can be where it's more, that's where I feel like they get the most tripped up, because that is a mouthful. And so it's, I think just as long as you're providing lots of examples that are developmentally appropriate, usually kids can get behind it. And it's just asking, you'll ask little kids, what, have you ever seen someone be really mean to someone? What is that like? And having them give examples, and unfortunately, they're quite familiar with it, and you'd be surprised that they can almost carry the conversation. But most of the materials, I think, anyways, they would generally, it may be more drawing pictures, for instance. Like, I'll often ask kids to, like, draw, like, you can't rely, there's scenarios to practice bullying, like things to say, and you're not going to rely on, like, a 5-year-old to be able to read a script well or whatever. So as long as you're just coming up with answers or having them draw pictures of what it would look like and them telling you about it, but I think there's all ways to modify it. Yeah.
I have a question for more of the first presenter.
Yeah, there.
They're right behind you.
You guys are talking about bias, and I know that the grading policy now is primarily the teacher's opinion of the child's effort, and not so much so the grades of the assignment as it used to be in the past. And so, wouldn't you think that system would be a little bit more biased in the fact that it's teacher's perspective on each student each day rather than their actual work?
You ask a great question, and one that I cannot answer. I say it's a great question because a lot of you guys might be able to answer that, because I know that a lot of teachers who are special education teachers have talked about that as well. Is that the whole standard, and how do you grade, and who's, yes, so.
It's like solely
Right,
graded on
exactly,
teachers.
exactly.
And not, no longer, when I was in school, which is not that long ago, it was just like, assignments, I can see my child's test, I can see homework.
Right.
It is not like that anymore. It's
Exactly.
solely teachers' opinion on their effort.
Exactly.
It's on their report card.
So I would think that you could leave that to the Office of Special Education to talk to them. I know that's those have been questions that I've heard a lot about.
Could someone from the Office of Special Education just give us your perspective on that? Because I think that occurs frequently. Sometimes children are labeled as unmotivated because whether it's a bias you have about that population or something, or the way they behave because of the disability that you're not as familiar with. So what is the perspective of the Office of Special Education on that question she asked?
We try to work through progress reports so that what you're doing is taking a student at a position they're in, and then looking at the progress they make and the different aspects within the classroom and outside of the classroom. So we don't necessarily look at the grades because we don't have control over that. That's actually within the classroom, but for us it's more, and if you're looking at effort, that type of thing, what we always ask people is what's the data that you have on that? What are you basing it on? So we really gear all of our efforts in special ed on data and how we look at things so that we're consistent with however we report on each student. Does that help? Nothing's perfect.
I know for a fact that not all parents receive progress reports. I just know even systematically sometimes it can not happen where parents receive progress reports for the IEPs. And so I think to just, not have any update or any idea, parents again don't receive packets on, how their students are being graded. So to say, wait till you receive the progress and then wait till you receive a final grade. And then be told, hey, there was no effort. It just doesn't seem adequate.
So what we look at number one, if you're not getting your progress reports, we need to know, so that we can remedy that situation. You should have a progress report for every time you have a report back. Yeah, no, but if we can't rectify it if we don't. And sometimes we don't have coordinators in certain schools, so we have what we call coverage coordinators. They're people who kind of go in and oversee, so they're not there all the time, but they still work to get those progress reports out, and they get them a little late. It's really not acceptable by our standards, but at least you are getting them. But in terms of all of that and the progress reports, you can always, at any time, meet with your IEP. Like I said, in terms of like if you have a child who's not attending, who their grades are starting to drop, or you see the changes that have been talked about tonight in terms of students do react. They may not react immediately, but then you will. You'll see it in their attendance. You'll see it in avoiding a class. You see all these other aspects. And we say to our coordinators, you have to work together. You have to know what's happening in the gen ed classrooms and what's happening in that school environment. Because you need to see that child as a whole child. And you have to know what's going on all around them, because it impacts what they do every day and how they make that progress. So we do rely on knowing how they're functioning and how their grades are working. We work on timelines, so it's progress report time, it's annual review time, it's when we do our evaluations. And we get that information, but if there are issues or red flags, we tell parents, call a meeting. And there are two ways you can do it. If you're not getting a response from your coordinator, there are assistant directors, and that's what Heather is one of our many assistant directors here tonight. You call the assistant director who oversees that school, and you can find out who that is through the principal and through your coordinator. And then they will step in and assist you on getting answers for issues. Where I come from, I'm doing, I used to be one of the assistant directors who oversaw certain schools. I am now the assistant director for compliance. So I handle, if you bring a complaint to DESE, I'm the person who will respond to you. So I get to see what goes on in the district and what we're meeting for our services and everything in compliance. And bullying is one that's increasing.
I just want to add, so I'm Lisa Connor, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm the Parent Support Coordinator in the Office of Special Education. So you can also send on the website, email a comment under the Office of Special Ed website. If you email a comment, I get all of that information, and it's a myriad of concerns, topics, whatever. And I'll make sure that it gets to the right person, whether it's assistant director or whoever. And I will get back to you, so.
You said to contact our assistant director at the school?
The one who oversees the school. The assistant directors aren't in the school, they work out of central office, but they're assigned, we have how many of them? 7 or 8? And
So you don't contact the school, you contact?
I would say contact the school
Yeah.
first. Start at the school level first, and with the coordinator at that school. And that coordinator will work with you and whoever in your building, whether it's the guidance counselor or whoever oversees helping students in gen ed with the grades and all of that aspect. But start with them if you're not getting answers or you want a higher level of interference, then the assistant director is the next level.
And you could also call the Office of Special Education to
Right.
find out who the person is, right? That's like a quick.
Yes.
Quick question. You guys keep talking about the number of incident reports increasing. This is just out of curiosity. What is the metric or the data that you guys on closure and satisfaction of closure of these reported issues? So I just hear a lot of incident, but then, unless I wasn't, if I misheard, I didn't fully understand what your remediation and closure to parent and student satisfaction.
Were you talking about bullying prevention and intervention?
Yeah, yes, yes.
So last year, we were around 96% closure.
Like, what closure in the sense that everybody's like, yep, this is a, like the parents and the students that were bullied or that
Happy
were
place,
bullying,
someone
yes.
said.
Yes.
So if there is a finding and you're not satisfied with it, you need to call the hotline and we will bump that up. So when I say 96, that includes people who have made repeated complaints with an end result that people were satisfied with. They may not be 100% in agreement, but they at least have agreed that the plan that was developed was enough to keep their students safe. So I don't know off the top of my head exactly what it is this year. If my name and number are it's on the presentation, feel free to call me. That's all information we will share with you.
Another question?
Based on the presentation, it seems, I guess, like the presentation of bullying from being at home presents kind of for a neurotypical child, right? So when I think about children on the spectrum or children who have intellectual disabilities, they may not present the bullying effects the same way. So I guess what are we supposed to do as parents to get teachers to kind of engage in that conversation? Because I find that when you think about a child on the spectrum, maybe when it gets to the point where we find out when it's gone too far. Maybe when it goes over their head because they lack social cues or whatever. What are teachers, like how can teachers and parents kind of work together to bridge that gap?
That should happen at the team meeting every year. At the team meeting every year, you're supposed to be going over to determine whether or not a child is vulnerable to be a bully or to be bullied. And you create that, and it's embedded, whatever the decision is then embedded within the IEP plan for a child. So a lot of times if a child is may be bullied and there's data to support that also, it would be embedded within the IEP plan and it should be talked about at that IEP team and then embedded within the IEP.
Right.
It's part of the questions that they ask. If you're not being asked those questions at your meeting, and you don't review that, you need to speak up, because that is what they're required to go over by law.
I think you're also asking about, as a parent, what do you do, right, to work with a teacher?
Well, it's like twofold, right? Because that conversation occurs, agree with you, but it's a check the box, right? Like I go to my IEP meeting, you tell me my son is part of this anti-bullying program. What does that mean? Like, how does that go in practice?
It should be embedded in the IEP.
It is.
Goals, not just like a blurb. So I think having those conversations and making sure you understand how it's embedded and then what it looks like in the classroom or in or the school setting, so you have a better understanding. And that should also be embedded in the progress report.
So I'll give you a real life example. My child was being bullied on the bus last year. I went to the IEP meeting and, you know, obviously I contacted the school, it was big back and forth with the school. She's nonverbal, so she couldn't say anything, but, you know, I was like, okay, so I see it says in this box, is your child more susceptible to bullying? I said, well, she was bullied. And the whole room went silent, and that was that. So how is it supposed to be written up in the IEP that my child is more susceptible to bullying?
So it's supposed to be that the team itself on an annual basis looks at whether or not your child is vulnerable to be bullied or are they vulnerable to be a bully, right? It can go either way. But then if your child's vulnerable to be bullied, there should be a specific goal focused on helping them basically recognize what bullying is, right? Whether it's through social skills or understanding, you know, what people are doing. I mean, I think the kids like ours that are nonverbal, it's much more complex than that. You know, understanding when somebody's being manipulative or bullying you might be more difficult for a child with an intellectual disability. But it needs to be recognized, you know, even more so just so that the adults working and supporting that child are on alert to make sure that that's not actually happening. right? I mean, it's a requirement, it's not just for special education, it's general ed too, bullying is against the law. And quite honestly, when it comes to sort of identifying it, it's any adult in the building, it doesn't go by just your child's teacher. So if it happened on the bus, then it would have been, well, what happened and how do we prevent that from occurring again? Is it putting a bus monitor on, or is it, is it looking at who the child was that bullied her and keeping that child away from her? There's a number of different ways that it can be addressed, it's fairly fact specific. But for a lot of kids, it's, when they're susceptible to being bullied, it's teaching them self-advocacy skills. So if something does happen, that they go and report it to an adult, they understand what bullying is, so that if someone's, taking advantage of them, particularly kids on the spectrum, that, they don't get sarcasm and, a lot of different things, that then becomes an issue of bullying. So, but it is supposed to be in the IEP and not just checked off that, yes, my child is more vulnerable to bullying, because quite frankly, 99.9% of kids with disabilities are going to be more vulnerable to bullying. It's what are we doing to address that issue that is supposed to go in the IEP. And if it's not in the IEP, then you reject the portion of the IEP to the extent it doesn't include any strategies to address bullying for my child.
I think in the, a little bit telling from what you said, and the sense that I think as a system for parents, it's kind of hard to not have an advocate, tell you about the IEP or what's supposed to be in it, or what's supposed to be out of it. I think it's very new to, society that the children are now tested earlier, or they're all tested, whereas before they weren't even all tested to screen for disability. And so I think as a district, we should too acknowledge that these parents are going into meetings, having to strategize things that they're not familiar with. And so when we say it's law that certain things should happen, the safety guard coming with the IEP is law as well. It says on it, on the front page, you receive this with the safety guard. However, parents will still have to reach out and say, hey, I never received this with a safety guard, but it's still checked off that they received it.
Yeah, so special education, right, I mean, we all have kids with disabilities, right? Everybody on the board is volunteer, and that's because we have a kid with disabilities in BPS, right? But it's all a new foreign language, right, to all of us, right? So that's why we have these workshops monthly, is to teach parents about their rights and the school district's responsibilities. And part of that includes, and it's required by law, that every year there's a basic rights workshop to basically talk to parents about the IEP process, what goes into the IEP.
All parents are gonna realistically, that's not just as a district to the district.
It's not the district's responsibility to educate parents about their rights on an individual basis, and I realize that, that's just the way the world is, I'm not saying I agree with it.
That's only why I said, we've come a long way to say, hey, we're now gonna check all kids for disability. That's why I'm saying, hey, hopefully one day we can come a long way and say, hey, we're gonna give advocates to families that go into these meetings that are hour long, and then they're handed a 15-page package. You know what I'm saying? I can understand a little bit of it, but I know that there are other families who struggle with that.
Well, it's a process, right? I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was an attorney before I had my daughter, but special ed wasn't part of my education, so I had to learn all about it, and I'm still learning about it. It's sort of a process, and you learn as you go, and then you continue to learn. And quite honestly, I always felt that the most helpful and beneficial information I ever got was from another parent, not from anybody else. But, I'm just trying to be realistic about what it is that the district's required to do. And you will have different teachers and different providers be more helpful along the way than others. But they're required to give you procedural due safeguards. That doesn't mean no parents know what they say. I mean, all the different jargon that we use and all the different acronyms, it's an alphabet soup that you're trying to figure out. And the IEP process itself is set up that parents go in and you're having a meeting with 15 people through the school, and it's you and maybe someone is with you and maybe someone's not. So it's a lot. So that's why these workshops are really to empower parents with knowledge, because knowing what your rights are helps you to better demand that your child's rights get met. And so, like, every time we have a meeting, different issues come up, and you learn a little bit more, and that's why the workshops are on the website on video, because look at how many parents are here, right? There's 11,000 families in BPS with kids with disabilities, and there's not even 30 people here tonight. So by recording it and putting it online and sort of just continuing, I've been doing this for 10 years now, right? Coming to these workshops once a month, and it's because you try to help the parent that's coming behind you in the journey to know a little bit more and not have to go necessarily through what you went through. So what you learned, you pass it on to them, but the district's just not gonna spend the time. What? Oh God, no, honey. I'm involved.
I just have a question, so, do you have a system where parents can ask for support from other more experienced parents?
Yes, so we have the website where parents can fill out an issue form and tell us what the issue is. We have voicemail, we have email. A lot of times, you know, so we're all volunteers, so we divvy up the work, and then, you know, if someone's calling back parents and maybe they don't know the answer to the question, you reach out to another parent, say this is the question that I got, can you help? And then a lot of times what we try to do is facilitate connecting parents with the right person within the district to help resolve their issue. But, you know, the district is required by law to have a special education parent advisory council. It's not required to have the other parent councils that they have. They do that, you know, as a matter of courtesy. But we have a little bit more, power, I would say, because under the law, we're established to advise the school committee on issues involving special education. You know, we try to do it in a systemic way, but, you know, because we can't be advocates for 11,000 individual families, there's just not enough hours in the day. But we try to help as many people along the way, and we try to encourage everybody that becomes part of SpedPac to then pay it forward and help the next parent along the way, because that's the only way it's gonna work when you're in a district this big and you have so many families. I'm totally in agreement with you 100% that the way that the system is set up and established is very unfair to parents, and the district have a lot more rights than parents do. Like, think about it this way, they're only required to give you your evaluations at least 2 days in advance of your team meeting. But if you haven't, you know, and you get 10 or, you know, 5 to 10 of those, right, and you're supposed to digest all that before the meeting. Yet if you have one independent evaluation done by a child, the district has 10 business days before they have to have a meeting, and they get to review it. So it's not balanced, you know what I mean? But that's the system we're in, and by working together and having more of a unified voice, then we can bring about more positive changes. And there have been a lot of positive changes, but certainly not enough.
Yeah, I think even with volunteers, some of them are just parents, so even.
All of them are
volunteers.
volunteers.
Right.
All volunteers.
At Advocacy, the association at Advocacy, they have been very helpful. And so I just need, even if you have another, you know, obviously you have social support or anything, but to have something different to mediate with the IEP meetings for maybe new families, or just, you know, just as like, we've come a long way, you know, I think that this can be key for, I've seen a lot of families, not necessarily myself, but I've been in school with other families and seen them struggle. So I just mentioned the effort being the only way that they can raise the children now, because it was something new for this year that I have never seen.
In response to your issue about that, right, I would say parent to parent. If my child was being graded in a way that I felt was not reflective of their actual work, right, in an objective way, you know, I don't know if they put numbers or letters on them, right, at this point, but that would be a conversation that I would ask to have with the principal.
I didn't say I felt that way. I
No,
just
okay,
said I thought
yeah.
that was off, and I had never seen that until this year. That's why I proposed it to the district and asked. And she mentioned that the coordinator should get to know the students long-term, and should have known them. I don't think that there's any time specified for the coordinators to know the students, although they gather information. In the progress reports, we still don't really see the children's grades of the exact paperwork of what they do to know, you know, unless you ask it, unless you're a parent that, you know, comes to. Yeah, I have a question. I I think we can get.
You can, but they should.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what, the proper course is a screenshot of the year, right? So I'm saying to know their grade.
The proper report should be quarterly.
Quarterly, right.
But some schools.
Don't get that, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We'll take another one.
Some schools, you said they send it to you, they give it to you.
We have one more. We have to, excuse me, one second. We just have another question.
So, I like, my child is on IEP, and he got an IEP because of the doctor. He was acting up in school, like, before the elementary school. And, one of the teachers said to me that he should be on medication, you know? So I went to the doctor and I said to the doctor, my child, I don't know what happens, but when he goes into school, he's a completely different person. So because of the doctor, telling the doctor this, the doctor put my, tell me to go to the school with this paper, tell them that he needed to be tested. And come to find out, they tested him off for the IP, he needed an IP, he was struggling with complete, like, understanding, reading, and stuff like that. So, I went, so we had to switch his school to get him accommodated with the IP people to the continent. I feel like, one of the things